My boss fired me. After I saved the company, $15 million. I just smiled. You know that moment when your whole life flips, and you're the only one in the room who knows it? That was me, standing in a corner office I helped build, listening to my boss, the same man I once trusted like family, tell me I was being let go. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I had done something too right. I had just saved the company from a $15 million disaster, caught a fraud scheme so massive it would have brought down the whole firm. I worked night after night connecting every single dot, alone, quietly, professionally. And for that, I was told I was no longer a fit for the company's new direction. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even blink. I smiled, a calm, deliberate smile, because I already knew, in that very moment, I was going to destroy him, not with noise, not with scandal, but with precision and grace. My name is Vanessa Moreau, and this is the story of how my boss betrayed me after I saved his company, and how I made sure he would never forget the day he underestimated the wrong woman. If you were in my shoes, would you just walk away? Or would you burn it all down, with style? Tell me in the comments before you keep watching, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story is just getting started. I wasn't always this calm. Back then, I was the kind of woman who believed that hard work was the ultimate shield, that loyalty would be seen, appreciated, and returned in kind. I believed that for years, almost 2 decades actually. I started at Lawson & Co. when I was just 24. I had no connections, no fancy degrees, and no mentor pulling strings for me. What I had was determination and a talent for numbers, the kind of natural intuition most people didn't understand. They hired me as a receptionist. I answered phones with a smile, memorized the names of every client, and took accounting classes at night. I volunteered to help the finance department with spreadsheet audits during lunch breaks. I stayed after hours just to learn the system. Within 2 years, I had earned a spot on the internal audit team. Within 5, I was managing it. By 35, I was the quiet force behind every major internal financial review that kept the company safe and compliant. When Lawson & Co. faced a tax audit in 2014, I was the one who found the missing forms and saved us from federal penalties. But behind every promotion, every long night at the office, there was one person who always believed in me, or so I thought. Graham Allen, our CFO, my direct boss. Charismatic, confident. The kind of man who always had an answer, always had a joke ready, and always wore expensive suits that matched his expensive smile. He told me I was essential. He said things like, "When we go public, Vanessa, you'll be one of the first people on the new board. Just wait. Your time's coming." And I believed him, because I wanted to believe that a woman like me, quiet, competent, reliable, could rise just by doing things right. When the company rebranded into Lawson Tech, everything changed. We moved into a sleek new office in downtown Chicago. There were new investors, new executive hires, and whispers of an IPO. Everyone started talking faster, dressing flashier, thinking bigger. That's when I began to notice shifts. I stopped being invited to investor calls, even though I had handled financial due diligence for years. My reports were requested summarized instead of full. Budgets were approved without my team's sign-off, and when I asked about it, I was told to trust the process. Then came the moment that made my stomach drop. I was preparing a quarterly audit when I noticed something off, a transaction for $217,000, listed as miscellaneous consultant fees. At first, I didn't think much of it. Large companies work with a dozen consultants every quarter, but the vendor's name, Silvercrest Advisory, didn't show up in any of our internal records. No contract, no project, no contact person, nothing. I double-checked our vendor list. Then I ran a background search on the name. It came back to a P.O. box in Nevada. No website, no phone number. That was unusual, and potentially illegal. I emailed Graham with the details, assuming he'd want to look into it immediately. His reply came 5 minutes later. "Let it go, Vanessa. It's already cleared. Not your concern." Just like that. No questions. No explanations. I stared at the screen for a full minute. My hands were cold. My mouth dry. This wasn't how Graham operated. He was meticulous, obsessive about compliance. The kind of man who once delayed payroll by 2 days over a $1,200 discrepancy. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. That night I stayed in the office until 11:30 p.m. No music, no coffee, just the soft hum of my computer and the sound of my own breathing. I started pulling files, bank statements, internal memos, archived audit logs. I didn't know what I was looking for, not exactly, but I knew what I felt. I wasn't being left out by accident. They were hiding something. Or worse, they were hiding everything. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. While most people left the office by 6, I began treating 8 p.m. like noon. I told my team I was working on a confidential compliance project, which technically wasn't a lie. And every night I uncovered more. First, it was the consultant fee with the P.O. box. Then I noticed the same vendor appeared again in the previous quarter, this time for $340,000. Different code, same fake address. Then 2 more vendors. Different names, but all shared something in common. No websites, no verifiable staff, all payments authorized by one person, Graham Allen. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a slip-up. It was a system, a web of shell companies used to drain funds and inflate service expenses, making our financials appear more impressive to potential investors. This wasn't just unethical. It was fraud. Securities fraud, corporate fraud, mail fraud. Enough charges to bury someone for decades, and no one else saw it. Or maybe no one else wanted to see it. I could have gone straight to the board. I could have taken it outside the company, but I didn't. Not at first. Why? Because despite everything, a part of me still believed in loyalty, still hoped that maybe, just maybe, Graham had lost control of something he didn't fully understand, that he needed help, not exposure. So I did what I thought was right. I documented everything. I created a secure offline folder, labeled and time-stamped every file, and built a full presentation, charts, timelines, even predicted projections of what would happen if the fraud wasn't reported. On Friday morning, I walked into Graham's office. He was standing by the window, sipping his overpriced coffee, looking down at the city like he owned it. "Got a minute?" I asked. "For you?" He smiled. "Always." I sat across from him and placed the folder on his desk. He didn't open it right away. "What's this?" he asked, still smiling. "It's something I think you need to see, before the board does." The smile faltered, just a little. He opened the first page, read the title, Internal Anomalies, Consultant Payments and Financial Discrepancies, FY 2022-2024. By page 3, the color in his face had changed. He didn't look at me, didn't ask questions. He just closed the folder and said, "I'll handle it. You've done enough, Vanessa." That was it. No, "Thank you." No, "Good work." No trace of the man who once promised me a seat at the table. Just a cold, controlled sentence from someone who suddenly looked afraid. I walked out of his office that day thinking I'd done the right thing, that I'd protected the company, that Graham would take this seriously and fix it, and maybe, just maybe, finally recognize what I was worth. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. But on Monday morning, I learned just how foolish that was. I arrived at work, coffee in hand, ready to follow up on my report. When I logged into my system, my access was gone. Everything, my files, my inbox, even my internal permissions, revoked. I was called into HR at 10:17 a.m. Samantha, the head of human resources, looked nervous. She wouldn't meet my eyes when she read the statement. "Due to recent internal restructuring and strategic realignment, we regret to inform you that your position has been terminated, effective immediately." No mention of misconduct, no cause, just terminated. I was being erased. I looked over her shoulder and saw a familiar silhouette watching through the glass wall. Graham, hands in his pockets. No smile this time, just watching, waiting for me to fall apart. But I didn't. I took a breath, stood up, shook Samantha's hand. "Thank you," I said, and I smiled, because what Graham didn't know, what he never even thought to ask, was that I hadn't just created one report. I had made 3 copies, and one of them wasn't staying in that building. I walked out of that building slower than I had ever walked in my life. It was a cold Monday in March. Chicago cold. That sharp kind of wind that slices right through your coat. I remember staring at the sidewalk as people passed by, not a single one knowing what had just happened. After 15 years of loyalty, I was dismissed without warning, without thanks, without a shred of dignity. And for what? For doing the right thing, for protecting the company, for trusting a man who saw me as nothing more than a threat in heels. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car in the parking garage for over an hour, watching as my hands trembled in my lap. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier, something deeper. Betrayal. It's a strange thing when it finally lands. You don't cry immediately. You don't scream. You just sit there, rewinding every memory, every compliment, "You're like family to me," until the words sound like poison. And then, when you finally realize none of it was ever real, that's when the pain sets in. I went home that night and didn't speak a word. I didn't eat. I didn't turn on the TV. I just stared at the report I had saved on a secure USB. Every number, every signature, every single receipt that proved what Graham had done and what he was willing to do to protect himself. He had used me and then discarded me. I had sacrificed so much. Late nights, broken relationships, holidays I spent at the office while others opened gifts with their families, all because I believed that being loyal would lead to something better, a future, a seat at the table. Instead, I was pushed out the door like a liability. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it all became. Graham didn't just get rid of me. He eliminated the only person in the company who could expose him. And in doing so, he made one critical mistake. He assumed I would stay quiet. That's what men like him always assume. That the smart, quiet woman in the corner, the one who remembers birthdays and takes the minutes in meetings, will just disappear without a fight. They forget something crucial. Smart women don't forget. We don't break. We calculate. And Graham had just lit a match inside someone who had already built the blueprint for his entire empire and knew exactly where to strike. That night, I opened a notebook and started writing. Not a diary, not a rant, a plan. Because if Graham wanted to silence me, he should have made sure I had nothing left to lose. And unfortunately for him, I had everything. I had the documents. I had the timeline. I had the contacts. And most importantly, I had time. For the first time in years, I wasn't bound by protocol or loyalty or corporate fear. I was free. And freedom, when placed in the hands of a woman who's been underestimated her whole life, is more dangerous than any title Graham Allen ever gave me. There's something beautiful about clarity after betrayal. It strips away the noise. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop asking why. You already know. I wasn't fired because I failed. I was fired because I was the only one in the building who saw the truth and had the spine to do something about it. So now, I had a choice. I could cry into a pillow and move on, or I could use everything I knew, everything Graham had taught me, to make sure he never forgot the woman he tried to erase. And believe me, I didn't need revenge that looked like revenge. I needed something cleaner, sharper. I wanted him to unravel, on his own. First, I reached out to David Tran, a former colleague from my early days at Lawson. He now worked for a private investment firm that had recently bought shares in Lawson Tech during their last round of capital. We hadn't spoken in over 5 years, but he always respected my work. I scheduled a casual coffee. At a quiet table in the corner of a bookstore cafe, I laid out the basics, carefully. I didn't accuse anyone directly. I simply said, if I told you there were irregularities in Lawson Tech's financial statements over the last 3 fiscal years, would your firm care? He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I handed him a small printed sample, just enough to stir curiosity, not enough to burn bridges. Not yet. He took it, didn't say much. But 2 days later, he sent a text. You were right. This runs deep. Call me. Next, I contacted Daniela Mendez, an independent journalist who specialized in white-collar crime. I had met her years ago during a corporate ethics panel. She had sharp instincts, and an even sharper pen. Again, I didn't give her the full report. Just a whisper. Check the vendor contracts at Lawson Tech, especially the Nevada filings. Her response? If this is what I think it is, I want the exclusive. Piece by piece, I started building a quiet storm around Graham, never once mentioning his name, never once sending a direct threat. That was the beauty of it. He had no idea where the leak was coming from. Then, I went a step further. I created a shell email account. From there, I sent an anonymous tip, with redacted financials, to the SEC. I knew the patterns. I knew what they looked for. I even highlighted the exact passages they would need to launch a preliminary review. Now all I had to do was wait. Meanwhile, Graham? He was busy celebrating. Lawson Tech had just secured a new partnership. He was posting photos on LinkedIn with champagne in hand, captioning them with things like, "Success is what happens when preparation meets opportunity." Cute. But beneath that polished smile, I knew panic would come. Because if you build your house on fraud, it only takes one knock at the wrong door to make it all come crashing down. Do you think I should have gone public right away? Or waited for the perfect moment like I did? Let me know in the comments. For the next few weeks, I disappeared. Not from the world, just from Graham's radar. No social media updates, no public statements, no phone calls to old colleagues. I let the company spin whatever story they needed to justify my exit. They said I had resigned to pursue personal growth. One article even mentioned I had plans to write a book. Cute. And while they celebrated their sanitized version of the truth, I stayed quiet, watched, listened, waited. That's the thing about subtle vengeance. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly, like a change in weather. First a shift in tone, then a whisper in a meeting, then silence. I heard through a former coworker that Graham had started asking questions. Not openly, not yet. But people said he'd been a little tense, more paranoid than usual. He started closing his office door more, leaving early, checking old contracts on his own, something he hadn't done in years. He felt something, and that's exactly what I wanted. Meanwhile, I kept feeding small pieces of data to my two allies, David, the investor contact, and Daniela, the journalist. I didn't overwhelm them, just enough to keep their curiosity burning and the trail of breadcrumbs moving in the direction I chose. I also created a timeline of events, carefully edited and beautifully packaged, not for the authorities, but for the board of directors at Lawson Tech. See, the board didn't know me personally, but they knew my work. They had read my audit reports. They'd seen my quarterly reviews. I had built a reputation as someone who didn't exaggerate, which meant when the time came, my voice would carry more weight than Graham ever imagined. But I wasn't ready to send it. Not yet. Timing was everything. And while I waited, I smiled. I started going to yoga again. I had lunch with friends. I even traveled for the first time in years. A quick trip to Denver to visit my sister. To the world, it looked like I had moved on. But inside, I was listening for one sound, the crack. It came on a Thursday morning. David texted me, "FYI, our firm just froze new funding to Lawson. We're reviewing everything. Expect some noise." That same afternoon, Daniela called, breathless. "Vanessa, someone inside the company leaked internal vendor names. I confirmed 3 of the shell companies. This is bigger than we thought. If you're still in, we need to move." Still in? I had never been more in. The storm I'd seeded was now spreading on its own. And Graham? He still thought the worst was over. He started posting again. He even published a puff piece in a corporate blog about integrity and leadership, complete with a glossy headshot and fake humility. He had no idea the dominoes were already tipping, that people in the finance department had started asking questions, not to him, but around him, that investors were beginning to dig deeper into expense reports they used to ignore. I imagined him sitting in his office, that same fake smile stretched across his face, while beneath the surface, the walls started shifting, because when you're used to control, you don't notice the slow leak until the whole ship begins to list. He still thought I was gone, that I'd accepted my fate, that I was moving on, and in a way, I had, just not the way he expected. I thought I had seen it all. After what Graham did to me, I didn't think there was much left in this world that could surprise me. But betrayal has a way of creeping in through doors you thought were locked tight. One evening, Just as the sun was dipping below the skyline, I received a call from Daniela. Her voice was sharp, rushed. "Vanessa, I just got a strange message from inside Lawson Tech. Anonymous. It says someone's trying to pin the fraud on you." I froze. "What do you mean? Me?" "They've started whispering that you were the one behind the fake vendors. That after you left, they uncovered a trail leading back to your credentials. That it was all done through your login." My first reaction was disbelief. My second was rage. They weren't just trying to bury me. They were rewriting the story, making me the villain in a play I didn't even get to finish. I hung up with Daniela and immediately called David. His voice was calmer, but the concern was clear. "We've heard it too. It's subtle, not official, but it's out there. Someone's planting the idea that your report was a cover-up, that you panicked and left before it all came out." That's when I knew. Graham was scared, truly scared. He wasn't trying to protect his name anymore. He was trying to destroy mine. And here's the thing. He had access. He could have manipulated login records, shifted timestamps, created evidence that made it look like the shell companies were my doing. And since I had worked on the internal audit team, it wouldn't be that hard to convince someone not paying attention. In a twisted way, it was smart. If I was going to expose him, he'd drag me down with him. I'll admit, for a few hours I spiraled. What if people believed him? What if the board turned against me? What if the journalist dropped the story to protect her reputation? But that spiral didn't last long, because I remembered something he had forgotten. I still had everything. Not just documents, metadata, original timestamps, server locations, print logs, versions of reports saved before he ever touched them. And more than that, I had a witness. 6 months before I was fired, I had trained a junior auditor named Elise. Quiet, meticulous, and honest. I had shown her some of the reports I was working on, just in case something ever happened to me. At the time, I didn't think I'd need a backup. Now, she was my ace. I reached out to Elise, careful with my words. We met in a quiet cafe outside the city. I explained what was happening. Her face went pale. "He's trying to make it look like you created those vendors?" she whispered. But you showed me everything. You walked me through the anomalies in January. I remember we even flagged that Nevada vendor together." Exactly. Elise still had the original notes, even an email chain where I mentioned I was escalating the issue to Graham, weeks before I was fired. She agreed to speak on the record. With her, my timeline was bulletproof. Suddenly, I wasn't just defending myself. I was arming myself with something far more dangerous than accusation, proof backed by someone else's voice. The story Daniela was preparing? It wasn't just an exposé anymore. It was becoming a narrative no one could bury. That night, I didn't sleep, but not from anxiety, from adrenaline, because Graham had tried to strike first. But he didn't know I had built my defense 6 months before he ever betrayed me. He thought he was outsmarting me. In reality, he had only confirmed what I already knew. His empire wasn't built on power. It was built on fear. And fear doesn't last. Revenge doesn't always come wrapped in fire and fury. Sometimes it arrives in the form of an email. Sometimes it sounds like silence on the other end of a phone call. Sometimes it looks like a man slowly realizing that he just lost everything, and there's no one left to blame but himself. I had waited long enough. The day had finally come. With the help of Daniela, the journalist, we scheduled the release of the article. It would go live at 9 a.m. sharp on a Monday, right as the stock markets opened. The headline? The CFO's House of Cards, exclusive investigation into fraud and retaliation at Lawson Tech. But I didn't stop there. At 8:55 a.m., I sent an encrypted email to Lawson Tech's board of directors. In it, I included the original audit report, a clean, time-stamped version of all financial anomalies, my correspondence with Graham Allen, a sworn statement from Elise, and a brief personal note. I was loyal, I was thorough, and I warned him, this isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. I didn't CC anyone. I didn't send it to the press. I sent it only to the people who couldn't ignore it anymore. At 9 a.m., the article dropped. By 9:15, the company's investor phone lines were flooded. By 10:00, Graham had locked his office door. And by noon, He was gone, just like that. No statement, no farewell post, just placed on indefinite administrative leave pending investigation. But that wasn't even the best part. Later that day, I received a call from a very familiar voice. "Vanessa, it's Jonathan from the board. I just read everything. We had no idea." "Sure you didn't," he continued. "We're conducting an independent audit based on your report. I want to personally thank you for what you've done. If you're open to it, we'd like to bring you in as an external advisor to help us clean this up." I let him talk. And when he finally asked, "Would you consider returning to Lawson in any capacity?" I smiled. "No, Jonathan. You don't get to erase what happened to me with a title. I'm not coming back. But I will give you one piece of advice. Don't ever assume silence means surrender." Click. That was the last conversation I ever had with Lawson Tech. But I wasn't done yet. The article gained traction, fast. Other companies reached out, not for gossip, for partnerships, for speaking engagements, for interviews about corporate ethics and accountability. I never planned to become a symbol, but maybe we need more women who don't apologize for speaking the truth, more women who don't disappear quietly, more women who say, "You may have taken my title, but you'll never take my power." And as for Graham, last I heard, he moved out of Chicago. He's under federal review. His license is suspended. His reputation is scorched. And the best part? I never even touched him. He destroyed himself trying to destroy me. That's the thing about power built on lies. It collapses when the truth stands up straight. And I stood. It's strange how quiet life gets after the storm passes. There are no more tense meetings, no more walking on eggshells, no more rehearsing conversations in your head just to survive the day. There's just stillness and peace. For the first time in years, I could breathe deeply, fully, without the weight of fear sitting on my chest. And when I finally exhaled, something inside me shifted. I used to believe that my job defined me, that my title was proof of my worth, that loyalty, humility, and hard work would always speak louder than politics and ego. I was wrong. Because the truth is, people like Graham never needed my loyalty. They needed my silence. They needed me to keep my head down while they built their castles on lies. They needed me to fix their mistakes quietly, to clean up their messes, to protect them from the consequences they believed would never touch them. And when I refused to play that part, they tried to erase me. But I didn't disappear. I didn't break. I didn't beg for a seat back at their table. I built my own, and I filled it with truth. My story wasn't about revenge. It was about returning to myself. Because the moment Graham fired me, the moment he thought he'd taken everything from me, was actually the moment he gave me back my freedom. I realized I had spent too many years trying to prove I was valuable to people who already knew I was, and feared it. And when they couldn't control me, they tried to discredit me. They forgot one thing. I don't need permission to be powerful. I just need a reason. And he gave me one. Today, I'm not introduced with a job title. I'm introduced with a story, and with respect. Because when people hear my name, they don't think of what was done to me. They think of what I did next. And that, to me, is the real victory. Not destroying someone, but refusing to be destroyed. I won't lie. It took time. To rebuild. To trust again. To remember who I was before I let that company define me. But when I finally looked in the mirror and saw not what I had lost, but what I had survived, I knew I would never go back. I will never apologize for doing the right thing. I will never regret speaking up. And I will never, ever let fear write the ending to my story again. So, if you're listening to this right now, if you've ever been betrayed, underestimated, pushed out, or punished for telling the truth, let me say this to you clearly. You are not crazy. You are not weak. You are not alone. You are powerful. And you don't have to scream to prove it. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is a calm, quiet exit followed by a better life. That's what I chose. And I would choose it again, every single time. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to take everything from you? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. If this one touched you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe. Because there are more stories like this, and I'll be here to tell them.